Paddy Tillett, President of the City Club. Welcome to another timely Friday forum, this time on a subject that's been debated several times during Portland's history, our form of city government. Our speakers today are Carl Abbott, Professor of Urban Studies at Portland State University, Robert Bull, petitioner for the Good Government Initiative, and Jim Redden, City Government Reporter for the Portland Tribune. Jim will serve as the moderator of a discussion of today's topic following presentations by Mr. Ball and Professor Abbott. But first, we're delighted to welcome three new members to the club from the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine. Please welcome Jennifer Williamson, Craig Gabriel, and Ryan York. We're delighted to have you here. I'd also like to take this opportunity to let you know that 3 City Club members were among the Spirit of Portland award winners named by the Mayor and Commissioners yesterday: Joey Pope, Gretchen Kafuri, and Paul Leisner. Congratulations to all 3 of you. There'll be no program next Friday. We hope you'll be busy enjoying a good Thanksgiving. But join us on Friday, November the 30th for a program on the subject of our Northwest water supply. Our guest speakers will be Andrew Perky, Executive Director of the Oregon Water Trust, Reed Benson of Water Watch, and Martha Pagel, attorney for Schwabe, Williamson and Wyatt. Please also note that we have a change of venue for the November 30 program. That will be at the Hilton Hotel in their pavilion room. So if you come here, you may have rather a quiet luncheon by yourself. Thanks to the generosity of our corporate friends and many of you, we've so far raised over $77,000 towards our $95,000 goal this year. Each of you has received a pledge card and a letter from me asking you to participate generously in this year's annual fund campaign. If you haven't done so already, please write your check today and help us to reach our goal. And remember, you don't have to write that check for the total amount today. This year, your pledge can be deducted from your credit card on a dangerous monthly basis at the rate of about 1 latte a week. It's now a month since we started handing out name tags at the Friday forums. Do please wear them during the program. Your table companions want to know who you are, and you might even benefit from getting to know them, and name tags will help. If you have questions about the club, board and staff members can be distinguished by their plastic name tags, so collar them and ask them. I've been asked also to announce that the club is looking for volunteers for our study of Robert Ball's Good Government Initiative. So if you'd like to be part of this research team, please let our staff know. We decided not to have a board host today to open the questions from the floor, so line up behind the microphone and ask your questions as soon as Mr. Redden's interviews with our speakers are drawing to a close. He'll give you a clue, I think. Please identify yourself as a member of the City Club and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. And remember, we really want brief questions and not speeches or opinions. Broadcast of the City Club program this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Legacy Health Systems, Pope & Talbot Incorporated, and Washington Mutual Savings Bank, and we're most grateful to them. Carl Abbott is Professor of Urban Studies at Portland State University, and no stranger to our Friday Forum audiences. Armed with a BA from Swarthmore and a master's and doctorate in history from the University of Chicago, Carl has for many years been a widely read commentator on the history and the development of urban planning in the United States, and especially on the Portland metropolitan region. Many of you will know his most recent book, Greater Portland, Urban Life and Landscape in the Pacific Northwest. Carl is past president of the Urban History Association and is currently co-editor of the Pacific Historical Review and of the Journal of the American Planning Association. Robert Ball is the chief petitioner of the Good Government Initiative that we expect to see on the ballot next spring. Mr. Ball is a reserve police captain and a Portland businessman specializing in conversion of historic buildings into living spaces. Frequent contact with city and community organizations has convinced him that it's time to move on from 100 years of commission government. He proposes a 9-member council similar in structure to those in Denver and San Francisco. Jim Redden is a name that became familiar to many of you when he published his own newspaper, PDXS. He went on to write for Willamette Week before taking up his current post as senior staff writer for the Portland Tribune. He's also written for I and Counterpunch, both political papers published by Alex Coburn. He's also written for Village Voice and Hustler magazine. Mr. Redden is also the author of a history of the modern surveillance society entitled Snitch Culture. Challenges to the Commission form of government in Portland are certainly not new, and the City Club has studied the issues more than once in the past, concluding that there may well be valid reasons for change. So today we take a fresh look at an old question, and to fill out the context for us, please welcome Professor Carl Abbott.
Thank you, Patty. And I want to start with a little bit of history about Portland's commission government. I have to be careful because right in front of me at the table are both Kim McCall and Drew Lansing, who know this subject just as well as I do. So if they throw something at me, you know I've made a mistake. So the question is, why is Portland so peculiar? It's a question we can ask about our downtown, which question is, why is it so lively? About our regional planning, why do we put up with it when nobody else in any other part of the country seems to bother? Or, of course, about the form of Portland city government. That is, why do we preserve this rare and endangered species of commission government when it's gone extinct in most cities around the nation? So why did Portland do it? Well, to start with, we have our current form of government because the East Side wanted it. Voters approved the establishment of commission government in 1913 by the whopping margin of 722 votes. The supporters were drawn from the broad middle class, from liberal Republicans and social reformers. The narrow margin of victory came from new middle class neighborhoods on the east side of the Willamette who wanted to distance themselves from the west side working class. Of course, along the waterfront. The background is nearly a decade of battles that had pitted moral and political reformers against entrenched political interests. For many in Portland, the economic success of the Lewis and Clark Exposition of 1905 had been undercut by the city's reputation for dirty politics. Political machine of George H. Williams ran the city with an alliance of business interests, gamblers, and thugs. That's a quote. Like political machines in large eastern cities, the Portland system offered protection for illicit businesses, return for payoffs, and promised favorable treatment for selected businesses and real estate interests. The first effort to change the system involved voting the rascals out and voting in reformer Harry Lane in 1905. The new executive was honest, efficiency-oriented, a mayor who made unexpected visits to city construction projects to see if he could catch any workers leaning on their shovels. He was later called the human question mark for challenging appropriation bills while serving in the U.S. Senate. Lane faced a city council elected by districts, accustomed to the old way of doing things, and consistently lost council votes 13-2. As New York politician in the same era, George Washington Plunkett, observed, reformers were like morning glories. They flourished briefly, but didn't have much staying power. Portland's machine made a comeback in 1909 by electing Republican Party boss Joseph Simon as mayor. Simon presented a respectable front, but was business as usual behind the scenes. Three things changed the balance. One, the continued expansion of the new streetcar neighborhoods east of the river. The number of East Siders passed West Siders in 1906. In the boom year of 1910, 3,000 new houses were built east of the Willamette and 132 west of the river. This was Portland's early version of suburban flight by the middle-class families who wanted the lifestyle of single-family houses in quiet neighborhoods. A second factor was the report of the 1912-13 Vice Commission. Portland Ministerial Association, with the help of former Governor Oswald West, inventoried the extent of vice and prostitution in the city, building by building, noted that many of the buildings were owned by prominent Portlanders. The third factor was a 1913 report on Portland city government by New York's Bureau of Municipal Research. The experts from the East Coast found a city that was lax, corrupt, inefficient in every department, from accounting to police to health inspection. was an embarrassment for a city that was still trying to demonstrate to Eastern investors that it was a sober, safe place to put your capital. Reformers mobilized around the commission form of government, modeled on the experiment that Galveston, Texas had undertaken after its disastrous hurricane of 1900. The outlines were what we have today. There have been some minor changes, but basically the outlines were the same. Nonpartisan elections for a mayor and 4 commissioners, all elected at large and charged with both legislative and executive responsibilities. So if that's why Portland did it, why do cities change? Why do cities change? What circumstances cause cities to change their form of government? There's a lot of inertia in city government. Portlanders have at least 7 times voted down the opportunity to get rid of the commission government, form of government. Why this inertia? Cities seldom change their form of government unless there's a crisis. Maybe a crisis of corruption. Best way to get rid of the rascals may be to actually change the rules. That's what happened, for example, in Florida in 1967, when 12 public officials in the Jacksonville area were indicted for larceny and bribery. Voters in Jacksonville and Duval County decided that the best way to get rid of the corrupt system, both city and county, was to merge the two into a brand new government. The easiest thing to do was to change the rules. Things seem to have sunk so low, said one Jacksonville observer, that almost any change would be welcome. There may be a crisis of ineptness. A small city may grow too large to be managed by a part-time or amateur mayor, and shift to city manager government for greater efficiency. Another example is cities like Albuquerque and Phoenix and Denver after World War II, when young and ambitious businessmen returned home after the war, mobilized against inefficient, small-time government by cronyism. They changed the form of government to favor business-like values and position their cities for economic growth, which of course obviously happened in those cities. That, for example, is how Phoenix businessman Barry Goldwater got into politics as a city government reformer. Or there may be a crisis of inequity. In recent decades, this has involved the use of the Federal Voting Rights Act. African Americans and Latinos in a number of southern and southwestern cities have successfully argued in federal courts that they're disfranchised by at-large elections. The courts agreed in a number of cities, required a shift to district elections in places such as Richmond, Charlotte, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas. So is Portland in crisis? I think if Portland is considering a change in its constitutional system, is the city in crisis? Is there a crisis of corruption? Well, certainly not like 1913. Portland has actually pretty steadily lost some of the habits of corruption of earlier generations that marked its transition from frontier town to big city. What gets headlines in Portland are things like the abuse of overtime, cell phone use, go-slow job actions by the parking meter patrol. Not that these are necessarily commendable, but are these the kind of corruption that requires a clean sweep? A crisis of inequity. In recent decades, African Americans have been elected at large to Multnomah County judgeships, Portland City Commission, Multnomah County Commission chair. There's no reason to think that other minority candidates can't win at-large elections. What about a crisis of ineptness? There's been stuff in the papers recently about the PGE Park deal, about the Water Bureau computer system, but only a few years ago, outside observers ranked the city as the 3rd best managed in the nation. I don't think it's actually changed all that much. Current problems may be serious, but experience from coast to coast shows that cities with all forms of government are handicapped in striking deals with entrepreneurs because there's an asymmetry of information. It's very hard for cities to deal with private sector entrepreneurs, and I think we all know that this is not the only computer system that hasn't worked. Portlanders have been quite capable of mandating change within the at-large voting system. They replaced Frank Ivancy with Bud Clark because they were tired of a particular agenda and style. In a council election, they replaced my friend Margaret Strawn with Bill Koch because Strawn was perceived as too narrowly focused on a particular set of neighborhoods and concerns. And I actually want to quote Mayor Ivancy. I don't always quote him, but here's a case where it works. Portland just keeps chugging along with the same old charter and is known as one of the best run cities in the world. So the political system certainly squeaks and rattles. It's not necessarily clear that it's broken. Maybe it just needs a bit of oil, a few more ideas in the gas tank.
Thank you, Patty, earlier for your introduction. I would like to start by first thanking the City Club for inviting me to speak to you today. It is truly an honor, and to Professor Abbott for providing a great historical perspective. I look forward to expanding on some of the things that he talked about after my comments to all of you. But I'd like to start by telling you a new term that I learned about 4 months ago. I went to work out with my friend at the gym, and he had beat me there that day. And when I got there, he was busy lifting the weights. And I said, well, how's your workout going today? And he said, it's great. I said, it's great. He said, I'm under the SRE program. Kind of looked at him. I hadn't heard that one before. And turns out the term had been spread throughout the gym for the last couple of weeks. And so I said, well, what does SRE mean? And he said, surpassing reduced expectations. And as soon I knew exactly. That's right. I knew exactly what he had done. He had set the weight limits low that day, so he knew that he would make the goal. The reason that I am here today is because our city government is operating under the SRE principles. When we expect less from our city government, we will get less. Carl's right. We're a wonderful city, but we are growing, we are adding neighborhoods, and we are becoming more diverse. And that means that we'll have many challenges in front of us as we continue to do that. Growth, livability, affordability, our environment, the river, capital planning, public safety, things that are important to all of us. And we'll have to meet those challenges with scarcer resources. Resources that were becoming more scarce even during the good times. And that means that we'll need to have good city government. And our city government is broken now. It is dysfunctional. You have to look no further than the current problems that we are having with our water bureau to see not that we might not lose money like a private business would, but it is becoming impossible for our elected officials to both, one, represent us as well as they can represent us, and two, have another full-time job, which is to manage several bureaus. Commissioner Sten talked about this when he said, quote, policy and software are different jobs, and I've always focused on the policy side of things. We're making a bad bet if I'm the firewall between good and bad decisions on software. Commissioner Stan, you are right. We are making a bad bet, but in this form of government, you are the firewall between good and bad decisions. Since 1933, the City Club has studied Portland civic structure in the reports, and they've concluded, as well as our research for the Good Government Initiative, that there's 4 fundamental elements for good city government. First, that we have a unified executive branch under one common leader, the mayor acting as chief executive, who's responsible for hiring experienced managers that by charter must have the education, experience, and track record for that important job. Two, that we have good representation. And that means that we take the broadest amount of ideas from throughout our city, and that we bring those broad ideas together to develop legislation and policy that is truly in the best interest of all of our citizens. Your report said 3, that we need strong two-way communication between city government and our citizens, so there's broad participation from all of our citizens in that process. And fourth and finally, that we have a good relationship between our executive and legislative branches, not just in the development of policy, but effective oversight from our legislative branch to our executive function. The Good Government Initiative changes our form of government from the commission form to a mayor-council form, and it meets the criteria that you established. And it does this in three major ways. First, it shifts the executive and administrative responsibilities to the mayor. All of our bureaus, departments, and offices will be united under one branch. There'll be improved planning and communication. And in tough times, like we're having now, we'll all be more easily able to work together. Second, our city will be better represented. The Good Government Initiative balances our neighborhood interests with our citywide interests. It creates 7 areas from which council members would be elected. 2 council members and the mayor continue to be elected citywide or at large. Our district council members will have to live in the districts that they represent. That means that they'll be a better reflection of who we are as people. They'll know more about us and our shared experiences. They'll know what our streets look like and our houses. They'll know where the businesses are, both big and small, in their districts. And if we're lucky, they'll even know the names of our school principals. And because they'll no longer be running bureaus, they'll be liberated to openly question the administrative actions of all of our bureaus. There'll no longer be this code of silence that says, I won't talk about your bureau if you don't talk about my bureau. Commissioner Saltzman recently talked about this problem when he said, quote, but in this form of government, oversight from another commissioner is viewed more of an insult. If you raise an issue that's not in your domain, that's seen as an affront. Well, it is time that we end this code of silence. Third and finally, all of us will have more direct access to City Hall. As I've been traveling throughout this city from Sumner neighborhood to Woodstock to University Park, Sunnyside, downtown, northwest, southwest, I've been seeing good people hard at work on problems in our city. And what I've seen is that they do this great work and they hit a roadblock when they come to translating that into good policy. And it's hurting us as a city. With a Good Government Initiative, our council members will have offices in the districts. That means that all of us will be able to walk in directly to a decision maker and talk to them about our problems. If we have neighborhood noise or traffic or all the things that affect us in our neighborhoods, we'll be able to talk to someone who could take that directly to the council. But just as important as having someone to go talk to about those problems, it will increase the marketplace of ideas for all of us. So that if we have a way, we often know how to best solve our problems because we're closest to them. We'll be able to walk directly in and talk to that council member and tell them what we think is the best way to solve it. And in the end, this will improve our communication. It truly will be two-way. More citizens can be a part of the process. And it won't be just my way or the highway. I want to leave you with this final thought, and it has to do with the intangible versus tangible things that we see in life. For most people outside of this room, city government or the structure of city government is an intangible thing. They know when something's wrong when they interact with city government, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And I remember when I was in college, I was reading about some kids that they were studying, and this one boy in particular, he had reading problems and violent outbursts in class, and he wasn't learning very well. So they spent money on detention centers and consultants and reading programs and all these things for the kid. And finally, somebody stepped back and looked at the structure of the boy's life. And they found out that he wasn't eating breakfast. And when he started eating breakfast, all the problems went away. So do we have tangible problems in the city? Yes, we do. Big challenges in front of us. But it is the structure of our city government that is the foundation of how we handle those problems and how best we can solve those problems and how we can meet these good elements for city government. We as a city must never reduce our expectations. We need to surpass our expectations. The Good Government Initiative will give us our best opportunity to grow both better and smarter as we continue forward to be a great city. Not just the best city, but the greatest. Thank you very much.
Redden, over to you. Well,
First, I'd like to thank the City Club for inviting me to be part of this panel. I do believe that the Good Government Initiative represents a very significant measure that is going to be appearing on the ballot. As I understand it, Robert has secured more than enough signatures to qualify this measure, and so we will, in fact, have an opportunity to vote on this coming May. If it were to pass, it would be a dramatic and fundamental shift in the way Portland is governed. In my reporting over the past few weeks, I've found a lot of awareness of this measure among people who are politically active, and a lot of interest in it. I'm not finding very much opposition at this point. I'm not finding a lot of firm, committed support, but I do find people being very open-minded about it. They want to know more about it, and they see it as something that they're going to be willing to very seriously consider. Right now, the Portland City Council does not represent everyone in Portland. It is made up of 4 men and 1 woman. It has no racial minorities, although perhaps Jim Francesconi might have some trouble getting on an airplane these days. But I'd like to ask, I would like to ask the 2 people up here at the table if they believe that is a problem, and if so, is this initiative a solution? And start with Carl, since he spoke first.
Well, I would say that I wouldn't necessarily, we don't, just looking at the members of the council, we don't know whether they represent the city of Portland or not. They may not mirror the city of Portland. Representing is a different question. So I just try to make that little twist on or redirection of the words. I think that I would be happy to see, a city council with a greater diversity of membership. It has had greater diversity in the past. I think we're just at a kind of a point in time when when the composition has a lot of middle-aged white guys on it. But there have been a number of women served on the council in the last generation. Dick Bogle and Charles Jordan, both as African Americans. So I think that what we find is that when good candidates run, they get elected, no matter what their background.
Well, I think I would start by saying first we have to understand a little bit more about the reform movement as it came about around the turn of the century. Carl elaborated on some of it, but really there were 3 things that cities did around the turn of the century because machine politics controlled many of the cities. And what they did is they instituted nonpartisan elections to break that up. They had at-large elections to break that up, and they implemented civil service. And what happened, and very specifically historically, they did this to exclude immigrant voters, to exclude people that didn't have higher incomes, and they successfully did that. The commission form was almost the furthest form to achieve those very goals. So to the extent that we see just upper middle class people running and being able to get elected to city council, that's a problem. Would we see a more diverse council under a new system? Yes, we would. We'd also see a council that was more accountable to all of the voters. Frankly, as I've talked to many voters throughout the city, they have frustrations, but it's impossible for them to mount a successful campaign because of the cost of the elections and running citywide. So I think we would see a more diverse council, not just in race or ethnicity, but in income. And I think that would be, and we'd all be better for that.
Under this measure, as Robert explained, there would be 7 council members elected from specific geographic districts within the city of Portland. There would be 2 members elected at large, and the mayor would be elected at large. The mayor would not have a vote, but would be the chief administrative officer. At the present time, the entire council and the mayor run citywide, and so in theory, they need to take into consideration the needs of the entire city when they're making their decisions and casting their votes. If they run from individual districts, in theory, they might only be concerned about the needs of the people within their own individual districts. And I think the question is, should that situation come to pass, would the council still take into consideration the needs of the entire city, or would it fall to simply trying to protect their own turfs and result in perhaps deadlocks, or at least not the kind of decisions that you need to protect everyone in town? And now at this time I'd like to start with Robert.
Okay, first of all, as I talked to you earlier about the old machine politics, the negative connotation behind what they called ward politics at that time, what were these machines? And it wasn't the fact of honest policy debate between different areas of the city of what's best for the city. It had to do with if you worked on somebody's campaign and knocked on doors for them, you actually got a city job. And that's not what this is. This is about representing areas of our city in true, honest policy debate and distribution of resources. Now, as I went out and traveled throughout this country and visited city after city, I saw district council members, and I asked them the question, what about parochialism? Well, the fact of the matter is most of the things that they deal with still involve the entire city. But they bring their diverse backgrounds and knowledge of all parts of the city to make that decision-making process better. Now, in terms of parochialism and how we dealt with that in terms of this initiative, we did a few things. First, we made sure we found that when we did the research that they became more parochial if the districts were too small. Too big, the council members were out of touch. So we balanced that. So the number of people within a district is about 75,000 people to start with. And to get elected by that many people, you still have to be able to compromise on issues and develop policy over a broad range of people. Second, we made sure that there were 3 very strong voices for our citywide interests. The mayor, who could still veto legislation subject to override of 2/3 of the council, but we also kept 2 at-large council members, so there was a citywide voice on the council. Third, and most importantly, what people worry about is pork barrel politics from the districts. We made sure that no one wins, no one can overpower the other side. At the end of the day, the mayor and the council members all have to agree to the budget. So we were concerned about that. That was a valid concern, but we addressed those concerns in the initiative.
I think that Portland is one of the few cities where it is still makes sense to talk about speak about a public interest that's more than the kind of vector sum of individual interests. And I sympathize with the goals of balancing multiple voices. I continue to worry about district elections reviving regional politics is a major factor in Portland. East side, west side conflict really paralyzed city of Portland government in the 1950s and early 1960s. I worry about creating a framework within which those kinds of conflicts can reappear, can be structured into sort of the city charter. There are certainly people of goodwill can work together in any framework, and I'm not suggesting that disaster parochialism would necessarily occur under the Good Government Initiative. I think it's a serious concern and possibility that we should think about very carefully. We do have, in fact, strong citizen participation through a variety of voices, through a variety of community-level voices that are heard within Portland already. I'd like to see, as an intermediate step, I'd rather see the Office of Neighborhood Involvement go back to something like its original vision in the 1970s as a way of more clearly articulating local needs and interests within the larger political decision-making. I think we could take smaller steps first to see if they do the job.
I'd like to go back to the issue of the Water Bureau's billing problems for a moment. Under the current system, the mayor assigns the different city agencies to the individual commissioners, and they are in charge of those agencies. And the way it sort of actually works in the real world is they become advocates for those agencies in the budget process, championing their agencies against others for the limited resources. Some people have said that one reason that the Bureau billing problems exist now is that Commissioner Sten was too close to the Water Bureau, had become too much of an advocate for it, and had kind of lost his objectivity. Other people say it's a good thing for him, he's such a nice guy. I was wondering, Carl, start with you, if you could give your views on whether or not that form of government that we have now, where they do become in charge of a single bureau, does in fact reduce the objectivity that an elected official maybe should have on the budgets they pass.
It's a question that I've been thinking about, and at the same time that you certainly do have some need to, commissioners becoming advocates for their bureaus, there's also the advantage, it seems to me, of a legislator who also has to deal with the problems of management, rather than separating the problems of policy making from the problems of management, that the people who make policy now also are aware that stating policy in an ordinance and making it happen are two very different things. So in many ways, I think the current system maybe provide some useful realism into the policy-making process. I also think that there's little likelihood that kind of bureau self-interest and bureau battling for turf and budget is going to go away if it's all managed, under one mayor. Having multiple agencies under a single executive does not necessarily bring them all into harmony. Recent criticisms of how the national intelligence agencies have functioned under a single executive, I think, is a good example. So I'm not sure that, turf battles are forever in bureaucracies. They're not going to go away.
Well, I would say that, in fact, our commissioners do become almost ombudsmen for their particular bureaus. In fact, not only do they get to set the budgets for the bureaus, but then they get to vote on those very same budgets. And that's a natural conflict of interest. I think we just have to remember, too, that the job is getting too big for the commissioners to do both of those jobs well, to focus and manage on those bureaus, and also to represent us as well as they can is becoming very difficult. One of the tragedies of the Water Bureau problem was a management and communication problem. The Water Bureau did its own thing, and Commissioner Saltzman, the Bureau of Environmental Services, whose billing goes out on the Water Bureau, had no input into that decision-making process for that billing system. And in fact, they have told me they're incensed about the fact that they didn't have input into that process. So if we can work together functionally, one of the things that this system would allow us to do right now, the mayor has the Police Bureau, Commissioner Francisconi has the Fire Bureau, Commissioner Saltzman has 911. All those could be grouped together under one common manager, more easily able to share information. The Water Bureau and the Bureau of Environmental Services could be grouped under one manager. Yes, you still may have bureaus that want their own thing, but we have management that can truly prioritize those in a way that makes sense for the city. One of the shortcomings of this system is we just can't do a good job of capital planning. It's very, very difficult for our executive branch to do that. We have these community things happening around the city right now, and they're trying to figure out how we're going to do our capital planning. And one of the things that Gil Kelly, the planning director, has been talking about is that under this system, it's very hard for them to do that. Well, we have a $187 million capital planning budget that we're trying to organize and prioritize. And having a unified executive branch will allow us to do that in a way that makes sense and will allow us to prioritize much better. So that it's not only just the problems of the commissioners overseeing, but how well are we doing as an overall plan. I'll give you a great example. In your 1966 City Club reports, you talked about one of the fundamental reasons that you advocated for changing the system of government at that time was that we started to have an overflow into the river from our sewer system. So we needed to plan better for that. And guess what? We never did it. The only time we did it is when the federal government came and mandated us to do it. And what I look at now is, can you imagine the possibilities if we would have planned over the 35 years and put that sewer system in, what we could be doing with that $1 billion today? We might be taking down the freeway, we might have more streetcars, we might have more parks, more police. Whatever our needs are at the time, we are not doing an effective job of planning and providing a vision for this city. And it's not because of our elected officials, because they're very well intentioned. The system is holding them back.
Jim, let's have one more question from you, and then let's open it up to the membership.
I've spent the past couple of days calling around to people I know in the political world, seeing if anybody is actually going to run for any of the city offices that are up for election this year. That is Commissioner Sten, Commissioner Saltzman, and City Auditor Gary Blackmer. Although, as we've discussed, Sten has been involved in a controversial issue this year, so has Saltzman, who got into a fight with some of the neighborhood association people. And so has the city auditor, who was criticized for his police review proposal. Despite these controversies, I have yet to find anybody that has said they are going to challenge any of these elected officials, and the major reason that they give me is the cost of running a statewide election. Beginning with Robert, citywide elections, thank you. Beginning with Robert, is this the only solution you can think of for bringing down the cost of an election, or is there something short of this that might still be able to achieve a goal of getting more people involved in the process?
Well, I think this is a fundamental piece, really. In essence, it's campaign finance reform built into the system. It will reduce the cost of elections. I've heard that time and time and time throughout the city as I've been going to these neighborhood meetings and visiting with community groups, that they are frustrated. And many people would like to run for office, but the fact of the matter is they know it takes $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to do that, and it's impossible for your average person who hasn't been involved, that doesn't have the contacts, to raise that kind of money to run. Now, once in a while, we can get somebody if they catch the public's whim, but on a regular, fundamental basis, people do have a hard time running for office. And in fact, I've heard in those the very specific cases that people have wanted to run against the candidates or the office holders you're talking about, but they can't. And they get beat down and they almost surrender to the system. So yes, now, are there anything else, is there something else we can do? Maybe some sort of campaign finance reform within the city could be something, but that's a different issue.
Yes, well, I would also be certainly, district elections would seem to be, it would seem to be cheaper to campaign among 75,000 people than several hundred thousand. I worry about under the current proposal about the disparity between the district council members and the at-large council members who would have to run at large, presumably more costly elections. Are they kind of super councilors? How do they interact with the people from districts? I think that would just have to be, we'd have to see how it worked out. Can also notice that all campaigns are getting more expensive. Metro district, 20 years ago, people could run for Metro district council, sort of out of their garage. Now they have multi-$100,000 campaigns. I suspect that we'd see cost escalation in district races, over the course of several election cycles.
Go ahead.
Ron Paul. Carl had mentioned the role of neighborhood associations, and Rob, I don't think you had a chance to respond to that. Under your proposal, how would you assess the relative strength of neighborhood associations and coalitions, since they logically would not conform to the boundaries of the proposed 7 districts?
Well, that would depend on how we drew the districts. They probably would conform, because if we did a good job of drawing the districts, we would ensure, and that will be left to our current council to ensure that our communities of interest stay together. I've gotten a tremendous response from our neighborhood associations because of this very fact. They in all the time that they spend developing solutions to their problems, when they develop those, they hit the bureaucratic juggernaut through the Office of Neighborhood Associations. It is not translating to policy. And those neighborhood people could go directly to that council member, who is also more accountable to those interests in developing policy for our city. So in that sense, the strength of the neighborhood associations remains. They would be a vital part of that process, but we would be better because our council members would have the time to go to those neighborhood association meetings. I'm hearing that they never see elected officials, very infrequently, and our elected officials could know more about what's happening. We're just missing so much because of that.
Chris Smith, and I'm going to follow up on exactly that topic because that was the question I was going to ask. I serve in the Neighborhood Association for Northwest Portland, and my experience is that under today's system, I think 4 out of the 5 commissioners have been to our neighborhood association last year. If we have an issue, we have access to all 5 members of the council, and we get heard. And I think that perhaps provides some counterbalance to the fact that everybody's elected citywide today, as we have this other form of representation. Under your proposed system, it seems like 6 members of the council have no reason to talk to us whatsoever. Isn't that correct? So if you're elected from a region that doesn't include my neighborhood, why would you listen to me? Well,
first I can say you're in a great and very unique position because you're right, some of the neighborhoods do get more visits than others, but the vast majority of the neighborhoods that I've visited don't see those elected officials, unfortunately. So you're fortunate to be in that position. Will all of our council members will have a point of contact, or our neighborhoods will with their council member, but they still have the mayor who they elect at large. They still have 2 at-large council members. But the most important fundamental fact is that they'll have someone who really truly does know and understand their issues better. And we have to look at the trade-offs of that. And what I'm hearing is that people want someone that knows more about their problems. And this system and this initiative will give us that.
Gretchen Kafori, City Club member. I'm sort of quaking because I have so many things, but I'll try to ask a question.
Okay. Gretchen warned me about this ahead of time.
20 years in all 3 local governments, state legislature, Multnomah County, City of Portland. Hands down, the most professionally run working together group was the City of Portland. That is a statement. I agree. I want to underscore Carl's point that with the right people, any system can work. With the wrong people, any system can be mucked up. The county tried back and forth different forms of government all during the 80s and didn't get very far. My question is, couldn't we get much closer with campaign finance reform? Witness the legislature where they're running in districts and spending now $500,000 in 1 Senate seat, Ryan Deckert's. So you've got, the finance does not automatically follow, in my opinion, and you can elaborate if you think it really does. And 2, couldn't you just do a better job of getting the right people who are going to think? Do you really believe the legislative model or Multnomah County are better examples of how government should be run than the City of Portland?
Well, okay. First of all, what did I see when I did travel throughout the country and I looked at district elections? I actually went and pulled their C&E reports from the different council members, and in fact, in similar-sized cities and cities that were bigger than we are, the cost of elections were less. That's just the bottom line. Is they were much less than we have. The people. Can we always guarantee that we'll get good people? No, but we can't guarantee that now. I believe, though, that as we do now, we will continue to get good people running for office that not only care about their areas, but care about this entire city. I've seen it, I've met them, and I know that we'll do that. So the fundamental question has to be, do we want a system where we're electing good people that is holding us back now to meeting those good elements of city government? Or do we want a system that will allow us to be so much better than we are now at meeting those things and elements that are important to city government. I believe we'll continue to get good people, and they'll push us further along.
I'd like to speak briefly to the question of access. I would like to reiterate my comment that when the Office of Neighborhood Associations was established in the early 1970s, its purpose was to facilitate neighborhoods speaking to the city. It's become increasingly a tool for the city to speak to neighborhoods. I think we should go back to the original purpose. I also would suggest that the mayor-council form, where the mayor would be the manager of all executive functions, would bear a lot of similarities to a city manager government, where the bureaucracy is much more insulated from public contact than it is under our system. With centralized executive management, essentially controversy would get communicated via the one person on the top. And I think that I think now when you have a problem with a bureau, something's wrong at Dishman Community Center, you can call up Jim Francisconi's office and they'll say, but they will put you on with the assistant in his office who deals with the Parks Bureau, and you have pretty quick communication, pretty good access. So I think I don't think we're in such bad shape. I think we can improve things fairly easily.
I'd like to respond to that quickly, because that is not what I'm hearing. Now, maybe some of us have that unique opportunity, but the fact is the majority of the citizens that I've been talking to, people that are out there doing the work, do not have that experience, number one. Two, the bureaucracy. In fact, as I said in my opening comments to you, this change will liberate our council to openly question the administrative actions of all of our bureaus. And in fact, when I went out and visited the cities that have these systems, you could walk into any council member's office and they would pull out a sheet of paper. And on that sheet of paper, they had a contact to every one of their departments. So if you had a question about a street in your area or police, they had somebody to talk to. And in fact, they were a stronger advocate for you. What happens now is we develop great plans for our city. We develop the Gateway Plan, or we develop a plan for inner Northeast Portland. And those plans get developed, and they basically, once they're developed, they get put into the bureaucracy. And low-level bureaucrats basically are making the policy decisions. So what happens is neighborhood people that were very involved in the negotiations of those plans, their frustration is that they call the bureaus up and somebody at a low level is deciding the interpretation of those plans, and there's no ownership after the fact. So to the extent that we had a good process and the community was involved in the making of those plans, it's the implementation of those plans afterwards that they hit a roadblock on, and no one has ownership of that. A district council member would have ownership of those problems and would give us the continuity that we need to ensure that the plans, their intent of those plans, continue to be reached.
Mr. Bell, obviously you've invested some significant resources in pursuing this measure. Have you some political aspirations yourself? And if that's true, I would think it'd be much more cost-effective to pursue within the existing system than rather fiddle around.
Right. Well, first of all, that's the first time I've got asked that question. No, I don't have political aspirations. The reason I did this is because I had actually considered running for public office and decided that that's not what I wanted to do, with my life at that time. But when I started that, I went out and talked to people in our community and people in city government, and I learned about how we worked. And I made a commitment to myself that I would continue to work on this problem when I made the decision not to run. And so the reason I'm doing this is because it's the right thing to do, and because we do have a system that is outgrown itself. Our city has outgrown the system, and we need to fix this. We are the most livable city in the country. We're a great city, but we have so many challenges. When Carl talked about why do cities change, there's forms of city government. I remember the first expert I called, I'd read all these papers, and I called him. He was back east. I can't remember his name. But I said to him, when do cities change their city government? And what he said to me, he said, usually at the wrong time. Usually when there's a crisis or there's a personality. The time to change is when things are going okay, because we need to do a better job of planning. We shouldn't be changing when there's a crisis. We need to do it for the right reasons, and that's why I'm doing it.
Serena Cruz, City Club member again. And like Gretchen, I find myself with just a ton of things in my brain and trying to focus on a couple. One in particular is that I'm actually just a little bit offended by the notion that the only way that we can get greater diversity on city council is to district city council. You know, I look at those seats, and they'd be smaller districts than the district I represent right now. And I think it's an insult to community members of color that, in fact, they're not capable of winning these types of seats when two of us, two Latinas, represent 50% of Multnomah County, though we do not reflect 50% of the population. We, in fact, reflect only 7% of the population. I guess I would challenge the idea of geographic-based interests. Neighborhood interests are critically important, and I do agree with Professor Abbott's perspective on invigorating these institutions to reflect and be better vehicles for the voice of neighborhoods. But people have interests in a variety of places, and race and ethnicity is not segregated. We are not segregated to the extent that we once were in this city, and in fact the Latino population is spread throughout the city. If you rely on geographically based approaches, you will not, in fact, have create an opportunity if the idea is that Latinos only vote for Latinos. That's one piece. The second piece is I challenge us to think outside the box. The boxes we have here are at-large or districts. What about other alternatives if, in fact, we think we need to change, like Lonnie Guinier's approaches for preferential voting? Cambridge has a way of electing people where you list them and you put them in order and therefore represent them that way, where you're not geographically based, but you allow people to develop coalitions across interests and across geographic boundaries. Sorry I took so long. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure exactly what your direct question was, but I can say that, first of all, there is no implication whatsoever that this means that people of color or anyone else cannot get elected citywide. I think we obviously all know they have. Diversity, though, is more than just ethnicity, as I said. This is also about economic diversity. This is about diversity of idea and thought. This is about diversity of backgrounds and different ideas of how our city looks and how it actually looks in different places. That's what it's about. I also myself believe that Latinos don't only vote for Latinos. And I think that comment is not correct. I think that to the extent that all of us look at who we're electing, we want to get the best candidate in districts. I think that's going to be the person that knows us best. This will give us an opportunity for our candidates to walk the district, for us to get to meet them, so we don't just get a flyer or see a television ad. And so we'll change. It used to be like that. It used to be that we would know the people that we're electing. And that's what this is about. It's that diversity, the diversity of idea and thought and economics, frankly.
Nikki Lynch, member. And I have...
Nikki, we've got to the end of our time. I'm terribly sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.